Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the California Small Farm Conference. My name is Evan Wigg. I'm with CAFF, Community Alliance of Family Farmers, and we're excited to have you here for this workshop. If you're looking for integrating food crops and cannabis, you are in the right place. Just wanted to give a big thanks to our presenters today, as well as all the conference organizers, and of course our sponsors who helped make this event possible. I just want to let everybody know that today's workshop is being recorded. And at the end of the workshop, you're going to have a little evaluation pop up on your screen. You can just take a couple of minutes and fill that out, a couple of seconds even. Just let us know what you feel about the workshop and the conference overall. Helps us get ready for next year's event as well. And then lastly, just wanted to say that there's a chat function as well as a Q&A function. And I encourage everybody to use that to introduce yourself, to ask questions, and we'll try to get to as many of your questions at the end of the panel because there's a lot to discuss, and I think there's also a lot of questions when it comes to this topic. So thank you guys for being here. And first off, I also wanted to try to get a sense of, well, let's start off with introductions of you all, and then we'll kind of do a poll of the attendees to find out where everybody's coming from. So why don't we start off with you, Ryan?
Okay, thanks, Evan. I'm Ryan Power of New Family Farm in Sebastopol, and this is just introduction level, not anything else. That's who I am.
All right, and David?
Yeah, I'm David Plescia of West County Community Farm, also in Sebastopol. Formerly known as Green Valley Community Farm. We're actually moving right now. Yeah.
And Dan.
Hey, I'm Daniel Stein with Briceland Forest Farm up in Humboldt County. And that's who I am.
We'll get into your origin stories momentarily here. But let's find out who's in the room here. We're gonna launch a poll here. So let's go ahead and do that and see who's here. Okay, looks like we got a lot of aspiring farmers. You got impressionable young attendees, folks. Couple more people want to answer that question, and we'll get on a roll here. All right, let's take a look at our results. We've got a few folks who are currently farming food crops. We have one person just growing cannabis, a couple folks growing both cannabis and food crops, a lot of students and aspiring farmers, a handful of farm service providers, and one other. So that's who's in the room. It looks like it's a range of experience levels. But thanks guys for sharing where you're at. So let's go into the first question and just say how you got into farming and the story of how you decided to combine food crops with cannabis in your operation. Daniel, do you want to get started on this one? I think you're on mute.
Thanks for the reminder. Yeah, I've been farming both food and cannabis for about 26 years. I actually am a second generation cannabis farmer. Both of my parents were back to the land hippies and grew cannabis to support building a homestead here in Humboldt, and then moved on, stopped farming cannabis and went about careers. And I after going to college for a bit, moved back to Hawaii and got my first farming job on a lettuce farm, and pretty much simultaneously started farming cannabis because it was really hard to make any money being a farmhand on a lettuce farm, and not enough money to buy weed to smoke anyway. So I've been doing it pretty much consistently since then, both farming food and cannabis. On a small scale. Our farm, Briceland Forest Farm, me and my wife Taylor created about 12 years ago. And that's when we started doing commercial food production here on our farm in Humboldt, and small scale medical marijuana cannabis production. We've expanded the food production significantly since starting a small farm for market, and have become a compliant legal cannabis farm as of 2017, I believe, 2016, somewhere in there.
Great. And David, how about you?
Hello, everybody. So yeah, I guess if we're going way back, I got into farming, I think it was 2011, just woofing, traveling. And I ended up on a CSA farm, and it really inspired me. So I apprenticed on a farm in Massachusetts called Caretaker Farm, one of the kind of early CSAs in New England. And that farm really, really inspired me too. And I met my wife there. And we moved out to California, actually to farm with Ryan Power here and his business partner, Adam, when they were using draft horses back then, which I'm sure he'll tell you about. And we fell in love with Sebastopol. Our goal was always to start a farm like the CSAs we'd seen back east. So we did that in 2016. Farm was called Green Valley Community Farm. We're actually moving to a new site this winter. So the new name is West County Community Farm. And we are pretty much exclusively a CSA farm, meaning we've always tried to focus on that as our business model. So the vast majority of our revenue comes from the sale of CSA shares. We grow about 200 varieties of vegetables, cut flowers, and herbs for the CSA. CSA is about 150 shares. This year will be 150 shares. We grow on about 5 acres. Our crew this year will be about 5 people. And we got curious about cannabis, I'd say in 2019, watching our friends, Ryan and Adam, doing it. They were starting to experiment with cannabis in the field. So growing it like a row crop, which was familiar to us and looked like what we were doing. So we were kind of toying with that idea. And then finally in 2021, we had a partnership with Adam and Ryan to grow cannabis on our land here. So went through the permitting process and a full year of harvesting a full year of planting under their tutelage and kind of in their game plan, under their cultivation manager and with their crew. So kind of a little bit of a unique situation in that sense. So yeah, that's kind of the short version of that story, and we can tell you guys more soon.
All right, how about you, Ryan?
Right on. Yeah, and now David's moving actually to the old Laguna farm, which is a hop, skip, and a jump from us. We're really excited to be neighbors again with these guys. So, man, farming for me is my medicine, and it's my passion, and it's my art, and it's my job. and we grew food. I mean, I was farming and I did the apprenticeship program down in UC Santa Cruz, and then went and farmed in Tennessee, then New Mexico, and then back here in California. And we had started with draft horses, like David mentioned, and went all the way up through the path of modern humans in agriculture, and from hand scale to horse scale to tractor scale. And yeah, we've done, 10 to 15 acres of vegetables for about the last 5 or 6 years. And for the last 4 years, between 1 and 5 acres of cannabis. And we knew right away from the beginning that it wasn't going to work for us if it had to be in some other special way of growing it. We wanted to find out how to grow cannabis in the field, just like cabbage and tomatoes. So we started just doing that, and we've grown it in a lot of different ways, from indoor to row cropping and the bags of imported potting soil. I just learned a lot over the years, but we realized that the genetics for the field scale application of cannabis didn't really exist when we started. So we started breeding seeds for our own use, and then started a seed company that's called Atlas Seed. And here we are today, downgrading a little bit. The California market is flooded, and so we're not going to go as big as we have, but I think 2022 is going to be a good year.
So wanted to start with sort of the bright side of things of, what's worked in that integration. I think, Ryan, you started kind of pointing to that, where you talked about sort of the shift in how you grew that to accommodate the integration between both food crops and cannabis. So you want to maybe talk a little bit more about the benefits of the integration, both in terms of how it integrates in your production process as well as your business?
Yeah, it integrates in every way on a farm scale. It's really just the logistical, licensing, and regulatory scale where it's just shenanigans of a difference. So it, to paint a picture of that, like in a row that's 300 feet long in a bed, I can't plant cannabis for the first 15 feet of that bed, and I can't plant it for the last 50, but I can plant a vegetable there or anything else. So what we do is we'll just plant. We did it as a joke a couple seasons. We'd plant the cannabis where we were allowed to, and then put cabbage on either side. When the inspectors came out, we kind of said, look, I mean, there's literally no.
Oh, Ryan, I think your audio just went out.
Anywhere in the field.
Just your last 3 or 4 sentences got cut off, Ryan, for audio.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was just saying it's on drip irrigation, so you can put it next to anything else that's on drip. You don't want it to be sprinkled. You'll get mold in the flowers, but it has a few different nutrient needs, just like any crop does. So we do fertilize differently for fields. We like to rotate a bigger block of cannabis around the farm, and just like we rotate anything else. I mean, in our experience, it's just another agricultural plant. I mean, and it loves to grow. I mean, it goes bonkers.
What about you, Daniel? What's been the benefits of that integration?
Yeah. So we're a pretty different model of farm in that we're under an acre of veggie production and only 5,000 square feet of cannabis. And our background was definitely coming from really babying cannabis when it was such a high value crop of and we grew, 4 or 6 plants in a greenhouse and treated them like better than we treat our children. But it's been really good to integrate because we are that intensive level of crop production, and we're really able to integrate cannabis with our limited space, I guess you'd say, in that like cannabis is, in the way we grow it, there's this huge variation between what cannabis is like as a seedling and how much space it will take as a mature plant. So there's the opportunity to maximize our planting space around it and get multiple harvests of like higher value spring crops in the spaces in between the cannabis and around the cannabis. We have kind of developed 2 basic cropping systems for cannabis. We're obviously no longer treating it or putting it on a pedestal like we were during the times when its value was so high, but we're trying to find that balance in between really giving it this attention, this craft attention to get the highest value we can out of it in a really competitive cannabis market, and add a lot of the efficiencies we've learned from our other farming enterprise and make that work together. So we do both full-term outdoor cannabis that's seed start plants that are started around now, harvested in October, grown really big. And then we do light deprivation, which is from cloned starts, and we are able to do a couple of harvests in the same space over the course of the growing season. And we've applied different things to both of them. They both integrate really well. The light dep we've been able to really integrate into our rotational crop system, just with some simple farmer's friend hoop houses and silage tarps. But yeah, it's working out well. I have some pictures I can show at some point if we got time for that, of kind of how our systems work. But I think it works. It integrates really well. Like Ryan was saying, cannabis is a really responsive plant that wants to grow. The biggest thing to me of integrating it with our other crop systems is, even though it's an annual, it grows a lot like a perennial in many respects. And I found it actually works well for us to not rotate it. I feel like it does really well in soil it's been in before, as long as you can account for its needs and pest pressures. And that saves us the headache of trying to explain what crop rotation is to regulators.
Yeah.
Which I've tried. Doesn't work.
Yeah. And David, I know you're a little newer to the game, but
Yeah.
And with maybe a tough first year, but I'm curious to see. We'll start with the benefits, and then we'll move on to some of the challenges and complications when it comes to integration.
Yeah, like you said, so 2021 was our first and only year ever growing cannabis on our farm. And it was really inspired by and under Ryan and Adam's cropping system. So we grew it in a way that looked very similar to how we grow tomatoes, a little bit more space for airflow in between the plants. And like Daniel and Ryan both said, it really wants to grow, especially in a climate like ours. It's hot in our valley, dry. So yeah, it was amazing to see, as kind of like an outsider, somebody coming just straight from vegetable world, looking at cannabis. It was it's a beautiful plant, an amazing plant. It added a lot of, I don't know, kind of an emotional excitement, spiritual excitement to be kind of engaging in this plant that we had never, there's so much taboo around it, but there's so many legitimate cultural, medicinal uses for it. So it added a lot for us in terms of kind of like learning something new. Like they both alluded to, it is just a plant. But in the way, I think because of the market, the way it has to be grown for it to be marketable is pretty different from our tomatoes, just in the sense of how much labor and nutrients need to be put into it to make a marketable flower, at least in the types of flowers that we were specifically trying to grow this year. So that's kind of a unique difference. But yeah, we're not talking about different, we're talking about benefits. I don't know. I think it could, we had the dream that maybe some of you on the listening in have the dream of like, you know, can cannabis kind of be this ringer that we grow on the side to help make the economics of vegetable farming in an area like ours work, or kind of give our family and our farm a little bit of a financial boost. That didn't quite pan out in 2021, and we're a lot more informed now thanks to this partnership that we had this year. But I think we can speak a lot to that attempt coming up.
Yeah, well, I think the next question, we'll let you keep going on that one, but is we'll get into the regulatory and market challenges in a moment, but for now, like, what are some of the on-farm production challenges that you might have experienced with integration? None. Just another crop.
Getting the right seeds, getting the right genetics. I would say there's a confidence threshold with a new crop, especially when it has a stigma like David alluded to. There's two main types of cannabis. There's day neutral and short day, and those are known as auto flowers and full season or full term or photo period. And so the full season and photo period plants can get really big. And so you need to know what kind of plant you're getting and when to plant it and what the right spacing is to plant it. I'd say if we're going to get into the nitty gritty on production level, differences and challenges when it comes to photo period full term plants. If you plant too early, you're going to just end up hedging them over and over and over again. And if you plant too late, you won't have full surface area on your bed. And that depends a lot on where you are, how hot your location is, what genetics you have available, and so on. So that would be one thing. And then the other thing, just on a production level, that's just worlds different than, so when I was thinking like just growing out and you've got crops in the field, you're looking around. I mean, sometimes people don't even see our cannabis. There's food everywhere, but it's harvest. I mean, once you get to harvest, it's an entirely different thing. It's insane, actually. The harvest and post-harvest is more expensive and more time consuming and more risky than the whole process, because you can spend months growing an acre of this crop and then just butcher it in an 8-hour period. And I know because it's happened. I had an entire semi-truck trailer full of curing cannabis, and those have diesel air conditioners that keep them cool, and we run dehumidifiers in there. And the diesel air conditioner overnight stopped working. And in fact, it started blowing hot air. So when we went there in the morning, it was like 170 degrees. And the cannabis had all been baked brown. So, that was tens of thousands of dollars in an 8-hour period. So that was challenging. Harvest, post-harvest, storage. And it's not like you don't use a cold storage for the rest of your veggies. You need separate infrastructure for the storage of cannabis. It's a dry room with the conditions that are right. So those conditions are different if you're in the drying phase, the curing phase, or the storage phase. So we have a space for drying, and then a space where it cures a little bit longer, and then a space for storage. But that's because we're limited on space. So we have to have high throughput through these semi-trailers that then we return to the rental company each fall. And it takes forever to harvest. I mean, it takes a long time. I mean, anybody out there that's ever picked green beans, knows that that's, you know, well, it's green beans times 10, you know. And I saw there's a question in the question thing about harvest, like how do you do it? And I do have pictures of us harvesting if y'all think that would be helpful. Does that work if I do a share, Evan? Would that work? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you can totally screen share.
Okay. Let's see if I can figure that out. There it is. Okay. So you guys see these pictures?
Yep.
Okay. So here's a field, you know, a drone shot there. All the people picking with black plastic totes and then hauling it by hand to the edge of the field into that truck over there. So, you know, we've done, you know, these are auto flowers. That's why they're short plants. There's a much more predictable production system here. They're going to get, you know, 3 to 4 feet high, and they're, you know, small stature. They require no trellising. It's a completely different thing. Much easier to grow. And on the right side of the photo, you see the beginning of a photo period full-term plantings over there that are starting to get big. But we have a cart, a tractor that straddles these beds with a trailer that also straddles these beds. So we do also do harvest where we're just driving the tractor over the bed as we go and filling it. What we do is drive the tractor over those flower beds in between of all the cannabis. We put those for pest control. It really works. It makes a huge difference. And also it allows us to drive a boom sprayer in later and later without trampling over the cannabis plants. The flowers just bend over, they're fine. Cannabis stops, bend and break. So that can be quicker, but when it depends on what you're harvesting for. So let's see. Now I don't know how to get out of the share. Oh, there we go. So if I've seen guys harvest with stripper headers, which is a grain harvesting equipment that has a bunch of teeth like this that spin on a shaft really, really fast and just pulls all the flowers right off the stalk. That's going to be for biomass. It's just going to get extracted. But then if you're farming on a scale like this and it's for flowers that are going to be trimmed that are then going to, you know, find their way to a retail market or be ground into joints or something, it's really a hand job. And on a more boutique level, I think Daniel can speak to that because I'm sure it's even more meticulous. And the bigger the plants get, the harder the process is too. We found that there's just this keep them at head high because otherwise harvest is insane. So I think that was, yeah, there you go. There's a lot on the production level intricacies. Harvest. It's very arduous.
How about you, Daniel? What's been your experience with some of the challenges of production when you're doing both?
I would have to agree with Ryan that the biggest challenge is the harvest and infrastructure around harvest, especially if you're working like we are with really wanting to do boutique level cannabis. You want your drying room not to be too packed. You want to harvest at the exact right time. And if there's a weather event, you want to harvest prior to the weather event, if it's good timing. You have to keep your harvest room with lots of air circulation, the right humidity, the right temperature, then you need to store it. So it requires a level of infrastructure that's very different from anything else we do on the farm, with the exception maybe of some like herbal tea blends and stuff. So that's definitely the biggest challenge. We do go large with our plants and vertical or multiple harvest because the size of our permit, which is limited, is 5,000 square feet. So we're very much have to maximize what we can harvest out of that limited area. So we just like the city, we go up. And it makes it a little bit harder and slower in the harvest process, but we have ways around that, and it requires more trellising, which is also a bit of a cumbersome thing in the labor, but it's something we've been doing for long enough that we've gotten pretty good at it. Let's see, I could do a quick share here as well to show you some of our cropping system. I was talking earlier about integrating some of the early spring crops with cannabis when it's small. And then talking about fertility and stuff, cannabis really seems to like fungally dominated soils. So we're doing as much work as we can to do no-till and kind of do lasagna style gardening on our full term. This is us crimping some beds. But here I was trying to get to, here's some of the trellising system for the larger full term plants. And I believe there was a question about companion plants for cannabis, like beans and stuff like that. We really, our aim with companion planting for cannabis has been mostly around our IPM program, trying to do companion plants for cannabis that address pest issues, or are like banker crops or trap crops for various pests that cannabis commonly gets. And there's a number of companion plants that do really well for that. Can also be wonderful animal feed, but according to regulations, you have to weigh every bit of leaf you take off all your cannabis before you feed it to your goats. I was talking earlier about doing a light deprivation with hoops. So what you see here is our light deprivation, and this is more on our common like 30-inch bed, permanent raised bed system that we do on our farm, and is the same size as one of our rotation zones. So if we're feeling like we have the extra energy that year, we're able to move these hoops and rotate the crop with it. Yeah, anyway, that's it here. Yeah, so as far as ways, the challenges with integration, it really is how much labor it takes at crux moments like planting or harvest, and how much infrastructure it takes to do it right. And it really is unlike anything else. And if it is such a competitive market that it's imperative, if you want to sell it as a high value product rather than as a commodity product, that you just nail it with each one of those steps.
And David, as someone who has been growing vegetables the whole time, you had your first stab at cannabis. Any additions to some of the challenges that you faced, unexpected differences in growing?
Yeah, in production, I think Ryan and Daniel touched on it a lot. Like, yeah, the amount of labor that goes into pruning, like leafing, the amount of labor that goes into feeding, which was about twice a week on their system, the amount of labor that goes into trellising for the big plants, photoperiodic plants, all that was, yeah, like an order of magnitude that we had never seen, so that you can get that high quality crop that the market seems to demand. You know, like you could grow great cannabis without all that stuff, but the market does demand this level of labor that was probably like, I don't know, 10 times what we would put into our tomato plants. So we grew a half acre of cannabis here last year, and it took, just like back of the envelope, I feel like it took about the same effort that we would put into our whole farm of like 5 acres on any given year, as kind of just a rough analogy of the kind of labor that goes into getting like high quality flower. But yeah, I mean, it felt similar to growing, like if you were growing a tomato, but each tomato had to be like the perfect tomato, you know, no blemishes, things like that. But in terms of production, I really liked like Ryan and Adam plant insectary beds. I think we did like every 4 beds of a beautiful insectary mix of like Phacelia, Sweet Alyssum, Cosmos, anything that will attract predatory insects to kind of take out the aphids and other creatures that will gravitate towards a healthy stand of cannabis. So that was something we do in our vegetables and that we really like to see in the cannabis. And then production wise, yeah, we composted a lot, and we had some fungal issues, like maybe the compost was too hot, but generally pretty similar bed prep to our other high feeding crops like broccoli and cauliflower and tomatoes. And then just a lot of feeding of really groovy nutrients twice a week, which we don't ever do that on our vegetables. So that was pretty cool to see. It's kind of like, I don't know, Ryan and Daniel, if you'd say this, but you know, there's that concept of like genetic potential for vegetable crops. Like the genetic potential of a kubocha plant is maybe like 4 or 5 like perfect kubochas. I feel like that's in cannabis, that's more the real goal with all your plants, is to reach that genetic potential of that plant, meaning it's getting the water exactly when it needs it, it's getting the nutrients exactly when it needs it. And that's how you're going to get marketable plants. Whereas with vegetables, you know, you try and help the plant reach its potential, but not really its genetic like potential. So that's kind of a key difference that we felt.
That's a good point, David. But I also just want to say that era is ending, and also that the cannabis plant is extremely resilient, vigorous plant by itself. So you just quite frankly can't afford to just sit there juicing it twice a week for the whole crop cycle anymore. The fertilizer bills are through the roof, and right now, you know what it is it doesn't, when it comes to sun-grown outdoor flower, just forget about it. It doesn't, you're not going to get that super high quality thing, or the market for it is so slim. Like what Daniel's doing on a certified regenerative, like really boutique level, it's just a sliver of the demand, just like anything else. I mean, you got Bud Light, and then you have, you know, that brewery in Fort Bragg. That's just, I mean, they're worlds apart. You have wine bottles that are $2 and wine bottles that are $50,000. I mean, there's light assisted dep houses in Salinas that are just legacy cut flower greenhouses for the last 50 years that are just owning the entire California market right now. There's a couple million square feet permitted. They're using grow lights in greenhouses that they're manipulating the light cycle to have successive harvests of clonally propagated amazing genetics weekly. They are just, the quality is comparable to indoor, and they're just crushing. So I think
I think there's also this opportunity in this market. I mean, considering like how our market is for food too, like when we go to farmers market, it's like people can go to Safeway and get tomatoes and they look gorgeous, and I think a lot of that, the stuff coming out of those greenhouses in the Salinas Valley has that looks like indoor, is sparkly and beautiful, but there is that sliver of a market because it doesn't taste like it looks. It smokes really harsh. They have a single feeding regimen of chemical salt fertilizer, and they aren't able to really focus on the quality of the smoke that's coming out of it. So what we've found is we do have this slim market, the same as we do like for our lettuce mixes. You know, people can go to Costco and get Earthbound Farms lettuce mixes, but we're still able to get a premium for our mixes at market. And it's because there is a difference, and it will be a very small sliver of the overall consumer population that cares or notices the difference. And I think that is where it comes into, if we had access to a marketplace beyond California, or even within California, more access to more consumers and education for consumers, that there's still this potential and opportunity to make that niche market for folks that do not like getting the headache that Bud Light gives you.
Fair enough. It's true.
So you guys jumped into the next question, which I think is really the biggest and thorniest question, which is, you know, what for those of, you know, especially for those who are maybe not familiar on this webinar with the changes that have taken place. What's happened in the last few years in terms of both the regulatory environment as well as the market that has made cannabis production so dramatically different than it was 5 years ago? Can you guys, somebody want to take a stab at trying to describe in a nutshell what's taken place?
I would say, whatever I tell you today, ask me again tomorrow, and it's going to be different.
It's ridiculous.
It's really bad. It's really, really bad. The regulations that were written are some of the worst regulations that there are, that make no sense. It's not a plant in California. It isn't a plant according to the law. Just like, let that sink in for a minute. It's not a plant. You can't grow it. It's not, you don't get any agricultural protections. It's an agricultural product. It's absurd. So that's a big problem. But federal legalization is on its way, and I think things are going to change a lot. And cannabis will go through the same exact history that every single agricultural crop went through, which is like a brief period of boom and a bust, and then a stabilization at a very low, you know, economy of scale production. And because that's the political economy that we live in. So it will do that. I'll say one example: from 2020 to 2021, there was a 1,000% price swing in the negative. But I mean, listen, if you can clear those hurdles, which is very hard to get a license, it's not easy, but say the licensing's out the door. If you can get 3,000 machine trimmed pounds per acre, which you can do, and sell them for $100 a pound, $100. People are like, cannabis is supposed to be $1,000, $400. That's still 300 grand on an acre gross sales. So there's still going to be potential, and the price is going to not, you know, it's not going to go down below $100 for a while until we really see mega farms taking over. But it can be done even in today's market, and $100 is today's market for outdoor sun grown at a certain scale.
Daniel, David, you want to add anything to that forecast?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the regulation and the tax burden, and it is ridiculous, and it's been a major stumbling block, and kind of disproportionately affects smaller growers that don't have either the capital or the economy of scale to be able to spread their losses out across higher production. I would say that the thing that I think is a little bit different than between cannabis and some other crops is, unlike food crops, cannabis is a luxury crop. And, you know, I grew up in Kona on the Big Island of Hawaii, where coffee still fetches $35 a pound compared to, you know, coffee from a commodity crop. And in like luxury crops, I guess what I'm saying is there's this huge range in what people are willing to pay for a value that they see in it, because it's a special thing to them. It's not the rice they're buying every day, or you know, the necessities. So I think there is that bright spot in it as a crop, in that there is the potential to, and for us this is kind of essential because we're not able to produce an acre. We're on 5,000 square feet and locked into that by ridiculous regulations, and unable to expand. So for us, focusing on that, on creating this quality crop that can be a niche in a market that is willing to pay more for something it deems as special, similar to other luxury crops, whether it be like alcohol, coffee, and whatnot. But regulatorily, it's got to change. I mean, what Ryan was saying about $100 a pound, yeah, except that we have to pay $150 cultivation tax even if we sell it at $100 a pound. So it has nothing to do with the price point, the value, anything. And then in my county, in Humboldt County, I have to pay $1 per square foot before I plant. They've just reduced that because of a kind of an uproar from a lot of people about an unprecedented like pre-planting tax on a agricultural crop. But there's these ridiculous regulations that kind of came from the regulatory structure seeing it as this golden goose of money for them to get rich off of, and instead of like coddling the golden goose, they are killing it and eating it for dinner. So hopefully they can change some of the regulations that are making it unfriendly to operate as a small business in the cannabis industry.
That was awesome. Yeah, I'm new to this, so I'm just a student and I loved what you guys said. And yeah, as a vegetable farmer who thought, oh yeah, we'll just get a permit this year to grow cannabis, like, whew, we thought it was going to be maybe like a month-long process. It was a 6-month-long process. I was working full-time, part-time on it, and that was with New Family's cheat sheet and all their experience and templates of going through the process. So without that, it would have easily taken a year or more to get a permit, to a zoning permit, which is kind of an easier type of permit for our little half acre of growing. So yeah, it was very intense. Like, I love what you guys said. I love what you said, Daniel, about the golden goose. It's very unfortunate. Yeah, it seems like the agencies are not in touch with how onerous the taxation in the process is. And I think they're going to hopefully be hearing from all of us this winter about it has to change, or these businesses we're all going to go out of business.
Yeah, another aspect of it that, as you know, makes it possible to be a veggie farmer and make a profit is having direct marketing. You know, our veggie farm is less than an acre. If I couldn't sell directly through CSAs and market, it would be completely unprofitable. And cannabis is like that right now. The percentage that we actually get after we have to pay multiple distributors, transport, I can't transport it myself. I can't send it to a customer, take it directly to a dispensary. Everything has to touch multiple hands, and is taxed almost at every step along the way, to the point that by the time it gets to the customer, we've maybe made 6 to 8% of what that final price that the customer pays is. So it's just not set up to favor direct marketing and small farms. It's not set up as a plant. It's set up, I don't know what it's set up as. It's like plutonium. It's like, really, they're dealing with it like it's this incredibly dangerous, toxic thing. I feel like it would probably be easier to set up a coal mine in California.
Oh yeah. Yep. We talked about this before, the thing, like the hardest thing it's depressing actually, the regulatory reality of it. It's awful. But I do think that here's what happened when hemp was legalized in 2018. Or is that 18? That's 16. Anyway, the first people went crazy. They're like, it was the green rush. They planted hemp all over the country because boom, it's just, you just get your registration and you grow it. And there was such a vast overproduction that you had, fields were molding all over the country, and the industry for hemp just turned upside down in a single season. And if we do see a federal legalization like that for cannabis, which it's really a silly distinction. They're both cannabis sativa. They're the exact same genus and species, but THC, you could call it. I don't know. If they do the same thing for that, I mean, it's going to be a bloodbath of the open market. But hopefully we could do some direct marketing, because the idea that consenting adults can't participate in commerce with each other because there's some overbearing rule in the way that isn't accomplishing anything for the public good. It's just it's pretty annoying. So that's the hardest part of the whole process is doing it by the rules. Whereas if when you do it not by the rules, it's just planting a plant in a field somewhere and hoping you don't get caught, which is how they've done it for years. But then, that's an entirely different thing. So we don't recommend that.
So, circling back to the topic of this workshop about the integration of food crops and cannabis, there was a point early on in the legalization process where there really was this hope that cannabis, that because for folks on this webinar, and as all of you know, like trying to run a food crop, small scale food crop business is incredibly hard, and with land prices and labor and all those challenges. And so there was this brief moment early on in that process where there was a lot of talk around, could cannabis be a mechanism for small scale food producers to essentially subsidize their food crop production, especially in places where the land value is so high. I'm thinking about, a couple of you guys are here in Sonoma County, and to try to make ends meet as a food producing farmer in this market is insane. And so there was this idea that could there be a mechanism through legalization to have that subsidy where wouldn't, one of the big concerns early on was, would cannabis push out food production? Would food farmers find themselves in competition with cannabis farmers and have no way of competing? And so my question to you is there any possibility that we could get back to that possibility? Has that ship sailed, or are there policy changes that you could see put in place that would recognize cannabis as a way to subsidize the food crops that are unviable otherwise?
Yeah, the answer is yes.
The answer is the ship has sailed?
No,
It
can do it. Yeah, it can subsidize your thing big time. It did for us. The idea of paying for this farm that we had on vegetable, you could pencil it out. It was absurd. The return per acre on cabbage versus the return per acre on cannabis that I just mentioned are in astronomically different realms, and that's at the lowest historical price of cannabis ever. So there's absolutely the potential for that, but what Daniel said is, I think the key there is direct marketing, because the scale of veggie farmers that we're talking about right here are direct marketing, so they should be able to direct market the cannabis too. and they need to just remove the burdensome taxes that have nothing to do, with like a tax is supposed to be on money that you made, right? But when you just have an arbitrary number per pound or price per square foot for the land that you're growing it on, there's nothing to do with money that you made. It's not a tax, it's a fee. It's like a mafia thing. It's like protection fee, dude. I mean,
But there's also fees in addition to those taxes. There is the fees, and then there's the taxes, and the taxes are fees.
Yeah,
you pay taxes upon taxes. They tax you, and then tax the total, including the amount that you paid for tax. Anyway.
Right. So they got to get rid of that, and then it did that for me. It subsidized my farm, and I own the land that I'm on now, and it's it's just another part of our farm now. And is this thing over at 3:30, Evan, or do we have more time?
No, it's 3:45.
I just wanted to make sure we had time to answer some of the questions I see.
Yeah.
Thing too. But let me know when it's a good time to.
I agree. It can subsidize the farm as well. I mean, less than it once had. I mean, one of the things it used to do for us is it subsidized our farm without taking the majority of our time farming. We were able to grow very few cannabis plants and still subsidize our veggie farming with it. And it's rather than becoming such an easy cash crop, now it's more of a specialty crop where it can subsidize the rest of the farm, but it takes quite a lot of energy away from the rest of the farm as well to be able to do it well. So we'll see. I think with anything, if you get good at it, you can really make good money at it. And if you don't give it the energy it needs, you can rot a lot of cannabis.
So I guess that leads me to my final question, and then we're gonna dig into some of the questions from the audience. But given that there's so many aspiring farmers on this webinar, given the circumstances of the market, of the regulatory environment, of the particularities of cannabis production, what advice would you give to someone considering a cannabis operation, and in particular a farm where they really want to integrate food and cannabis production, probably on a small farm scale? What would you what advice would you give?
Wait. Just wait. It's not the time yet. If you're just getting started, I think that the regulatory burden and tax burden will change, but in the meantime, I think the amount of time and energy and money that you'd have to throw at it right now isn't balanced with what you'd get out of it in the next year or two. And I mean, it's all a gamble, but I think that a lot of that will change in the coming years, and it'll be an easier market to get into.
Yeah, I agree. If you can find a farm to work on that's doing it, which is not easy either, that would be a great way to ease into it. But I mean, at least in California, the answer is wait, and the market is so volatile. I mean, there's like some smoke that needs to settle, so to speak.
No pun intended.
Right. Oh yeah. I would wait too. It was the hardest thing I've ever done besides have kids, was get through the permitting thing. I mean, it was so frustrating, and I had to draw on all my resources and social capital, and I have a college degree, and it was harder than like 2 years of college. And there's these big corporations that just have teams of lawyers that just kind of push it all through and everything. Yeah, there's some. Anyways, wait, I agree.
I do have to say, Ryan, that the memes that came out of your hardship were gold.
If anybody's looking for a good farmer meme, you should check out New Family Farm on Instagram. And we have daily prompts as part of the conference. So every day we have an online interactive Jamboard, and I believe Tuesday's prompt is farm memes. So Ryan, I'm going to be hitting you up for some good ones on that one, a little farm meme competition.
Great.
But before we jump in the Q&A, David, you just went through it. Anything you want to add?
Just seconding what they both said. Yeah, you can't underestimate how difficult permitting process is. Every site is very different too, and the regulatory bodies have a really hard time with gray areas, even though all properties by definition will be gray, because they will be. So I don't know. Yeah, you can't underestimate. If you really are serious about seeking a permit out, you'll already have checked, the local counties have, they should, or Sonoma County at least has like an ArcGIS site where you can kind of get a rough, is it next to a school, that kind of thing. And then give yourself at least a year and more money, triple the money you think you'll need to actually just even get the permit through. So like these guys have imparted, now is probably not the best time to do that because the market is so low. But yeah.
Great. Well, let's dig into some audience questions. Maybe we start with this one about integration in terms of can cannabis be successfully grown alongside perennial crops like a grape vineyard?
Some of our cannabis production we do in hugel beds, and they're pretty much just for cannabis, but the beds are also heavily planted with perennials. No grape vineyards. Grapes would be a challenging one. They also, would need a lot of airflow, have powdery mildew issues, things like that, or aggressive growers. But we grow some production, potatoes, various herbs that we use for tea blends and things like that in our perennial cannabis beds. It grows great along perennials. It's just important to remember kind of the amount of space something takes in time. Grapes and cannabis both will be at their peak at about the same time, maybe potentially growing a day neutral cannabis in between the rows of grapes that you can harvest before the grapevines really take up all the canopy would work. But our experience is trying to integrate cannabis with either perennial or annual crops that leave cannabis the space to have a full canopy by the time you want to harvest it.
Anybody else want to jump into there?
Yeah, just seconding what Daniel said about space. Like if you were doing it under an orchard, that probably wouldn't work because of the light factor. My impression is cannabis needs a lot of light and likes of like full sun, so that could be tricky.
Another person, Marisol asks, what are some of the biggest, most prevalent pests when it comes to cannabis?
Yeah, so, well, I think this varies by region in the country, but the biggest pest of cannabis is mold. And it will rot the flowers from the inside out. And by the time you see it, if you see it on 10% of the crop, it's on 50% of the crop. That's the main one. There's insect pests. I mean, there's literally a cannabis aphid species identified that evolved from the hop aphid. It's yellow-green. There's these mites that are like microscopic boogeymen that, because cannabis is still like such a clonally propagated plant, you have the transmission of pest and disease happening across the country and the state just at levels that are just insane. So we've bought clones that came with every manner of pest, but mold, and you got russet mites, spider mites, some aphid problems. Insect pests, not really, I haven't seen here anything more than that. And the beds that we put in between of them, of the insectary blend, really do an amazing job. We had an agronomist come and consult with us 2 years ago, and they were going to different farms all around Northern California, and they would see these outbreaks of pests. But when they came to our farm, they really noticed how big of a difference it made, and they said so. And I do see there's a question about that in the chat too. So I'll just really quickly show you guys this. So that's Sweet Alyssum down the middle there. And that's a standard one. But another thing just to look at, like, look how many T-posts there are right there. That's money. And that trellis net's not cheap either. And you have to put it every, 12 to 18 inches. And those plants are going to get more than twice that size by the end of the season. So every few beds, yeah, we just experimented. There's different beneficial blends. Johnny's had one. The farm supply store in your local area probably has one. Try them all. They're all great.
In the last workshop, we saw we had a presentation about drones that drop predatory mites that eat the mites that live on strawberries. So maybe we'll see some parachuting mites in the cannabis fields soon enough.
They do that. I've seen them do that. We apply those mites. They do those mites work before you get to the level of spraying. It's a great solution.
I sprinkled them on the plants with my fingers.
Exactly. We use pretty regular predatory insects, both for the aphids and mites. And to answer that question that's coming up about specific companion plants for that, the Sweet Alyssum's great. We also do Queen Anne's lace, an ornamental ammy, it's called, that we can use for cut flowers as well. And both of those are really going for the predator species, being food for adult wasps, ladybugs, green lacewing, stuff like that. And then we've also really found that for mites, specifically spider mites and russet mites, that catnip works really well. It's something they prefer to cannabis, and we put it in the area. They tend to flock to it, and then we can do our releases of predators on the catnip, and they just go to town, and it becomes a breeding ground for our predators. We also deal with symphylans, a soil pest, and we plant potatoes on the beds that we plant cannabis on, because symphylans prefer potatoes, and for some reason that I don't think there's research out yet on, they don't really like being in beds where potatoes have grown previously. So it has that effect as well. And pretty much any other flower that'll attract beneficials work really well. And then there's companion plants that increase terpene production on cannabis, things like chamomile. None of the others are coming to mind right now, but there's plants that help produce higher terpene content in the plants they're surrounded by.
We got another question here, back to the regulatory question about, are you familiar with the regulations in other states, and whether or not there are other states with maybe more constructive, reasonable regulations that California could use as an example?
Well, it's kind of a joke in the industry with Oklahoma. It's like reverse Dust Bowl. Yeah, Oklahoma's over the counter permits with no acreage limitations, and they're just $700 or something. They also have the most dispensaries per capita of any state, Oklahoma. So people just put in a dispensary and sell cannabis really easily. Right, we're talking about how hard it is for growers to get a license to grow it, but it's like it's also hard to get a license to make a store just to sell it too. So Oklahoma is an example. That's kind of just like freewheeling cowboy, like open the floodgates kind of thing. Every state's really different. I just read that New York, and you should see the lady's face. Maybe she's the ag commissioner of New York. Her face is just like, they just made it so all hemp producers can grow cannabis for 2 years or something. I was like, all right, now you guys can just do that while we write the laws. So that should be interesting. That's a huge market, New York City. So Oklahoma, a lot of people moved to Oklahoma from California in the last 2 years because of it.
Another question was, are there security concerns and costs that come with adding cannabis to a vegetable farm?
Yes, in Sonoma County, you have to have like some security lights and like cameras. And does it have to have a fence? I don't think it has to have a fence. Or yeah, it has to have a fence.
And when you're saying have to, you mean legally?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We were lucky because there was already a deer fence around the vegetable farm, but we had to upgrade some gates and the cameras and the lights. It wasn't insane, but yeah, it was a cost. I think maybe in other kinds of operations, it's way more onerous, like indoor, if it's closer to population. I'm not sure.
Also, as cannabis becomes less valuable, the security concern becomes less of a thing. It's like back in the black market days, it was a huge concern because if somebody could run off with a tote full of cannabis, it's thousands of dollars. Now it's like you might as well steal something that has some value and you can carry.
Yeah, and then in terms of like the question of actually, is there a concern? The answer is yes. I mean, I know operations that are still getting robbed.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a lot of cash on hand too, right? So that's another.
Yeah, I mean the banking. Oh, we didn't even talk about banking.
Well, with 2 minutes left, we probably can't get too into the banking system, but that's a whole other can of worms. Maybe we'll do a whole separate workshop just on that. With our last 2 minutes, I want to know if just you have any final thoughts about this, knowing that at least from the perspective of our organization and our conference, our goal is to see small farms thrive, to see healthy local food being grown and sold. What are your hopes? And can you I know it's been a little bit of a downer at times in this workshop, but can you leave us with anything to look forward to?
I would say if you're into growing it, go for it. And these days you can just plant some personal plants. You can grow 6 plants out there, see if it's a plant you like to grow, and think about how it integrates into it. Because I mean, at the end of the day, the challenging thing is interacting with the regulatory process, but it is a like wonderful, fun, inspiring plant to grow. And I think we're all farmers because we like doing different things and having a lot of variety of work and having challenges. And it is a different kind of crop in a lot of ways to grow, harvest, process than what you're used to. And it's an inspiring crop to grow.
Right.
Yeah. It is a fun plant to grow. And I think that a small farm economy is trashed in general, and cannabis or not, it takes a lot of gusto and chutzpah to just make a small scale vegetable farm work. And people need to change, the consumer needs to change their preferences, and we need better access to markets, and there needs to be a mechanism to remove good ag land from the speculative development market. And I I don't have any like light at the end of the tunnel for you. That's my authentic answer is no.
Oh, appreciate the honesty. Last words, David?
Yeah, like it's not a silver bullet. We were hoping it could be a silver bullet for economic stimulus for our operation, but I think at the end of the day, we'll still keep our eyes open for that opportunity because we've done it before now. But do what you do well, you know, and if that's cannabis, do cannabis well, work for people who are doing it, learn like these guys have the ins and outs of the business and you'll be okay. Or if you like vegetables, create a viable vegetable business, you know, and mixing them, it's kind of like our takeaway was it's really two businesses, you know, it's because of the regulatory and the market stuff, it's not really like a side crop that you can really throw in a farm. It really has to be its own separate business with its own separate manager or managers, own separate crew. It can be integrated, but it's kind of like anything, you know, if you're going to do viticulture well, you have to focus on viticulture, that kind of thing. So it's kind of a downer, but yeah, you can do it, but it's going to make you have to focus and become a master at it.
Well, it certainly sounds like it has to be a labor of love, no matter what. So,
could I say on a bright note what Ryan was saying about small farms earlier? I really think, to use the government lingo, that cannabis can be a gateway crop for consumers. There's a lot of people out there who've got a lot of passion for cannabis, but have yet to find that passion for small farms and growing in other ways. And that as cannabis becomes more of an agricultural crop, I think we'll have this opportunity to connect with people as small farms growing veggies, as small farms in general, that may not have otherwise ever noticed we existed.
Love that. That's really great. And on that note, that's a great place to leave it. I really appreciate. Thank you, David, Daniel, Brian, and thanks everybody for tuning in. And hope to see you at the next workshop. Have a great afternoon, everybody.